Florida. And yesterday we spoke to a question from John Kennedy about the concept of being pixie-led. And John had a second part to that question that I wanted to speak to today. And in the second part, John suggested that from his point of view, fairies might be classified similarly to elementals. And what would I think of this? And my answer is that, well, more or less in modern terms that might be the case, but it's a much more complicated discussion than that, and I thought that I would take this occasion to speak to the idea of fairies. And when we speak of fairies today, we're speaking about something very specific, but it's not necessarily what we were speaking about under that term hundreds of years ago. If you look back at older mythology regarding fairies, they're very different. And generally speaking, I think that it must be assumed that it was referring to the spirits of the dead. And this can be inferred by a number of things associated with them, including the fact that they were associated with ancient tombs where they were believed to live and ride out from on particular occasions, usually Beltane and Samhain. They were often in the role of benefactors, not unlike spirit guides. It was an important belief that if you happened to find yourself in the land of the fairies, you must not eat or drink anything, or you would be obliged to stay. And you should recognize this idea from the story of Persephone, who encountered a similar problem. But because she was a goddess with powerful connections, and because she had only eaten a conveniently round number of pomegranate seeds, she got a workaround. But generally, once you've eaten of the food of the dead, you do not return to the living. And also, if you look at, for example, the character of Cinderella's fairy godmother and similar characters in similar myths, you'll see that they don't behave at all like what we talk about under the term fairy today, but are much more like ancestor spirits. And in fact, Cinderella's fairy godmother is often explained as being the spirit of her deceased mother, helping her from the spirit world. So for these reasons and many others, I hold with the theory that in earlier centuries, when they were talking about fairies, they were speaking of the spirits of the dead and the ancestors. Now, this has changed over time, and in modern parlance, when we talk about fairies, we're generally talking about nature spirits, often very similar to what the Greeks would have called dryads, who were spirits of trees, or other kinds of spirits who were spirits of plants. So if you look at depictions of fairies in modern thought, they often are very clearly shown as plant spirits, adorned with leaves and flowers and so forth. And I think that generally when people talk about fairies now, that's what they mean. The spirits or devas of the natural world. And this is very cool, but a different concept from the earlier one. And certainly a very real thing. So in that sense, could they be classed similarly to elemental spirits? Well, yes, as forces of the natural world, absolutely. And I think it's important to bear in mind that this term has evolved considerably, just as the term familiar has also evolved considerably from its original meaning. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what happens in language. That's what happens in religion and mythology. Ideas advance and change. And as in this case, it doesn't mean the older idea goes away. Sometimes it just changes terms. Because we certainly still work with the spirits of the dead and ancestors in particular, but we've used the term fairy now to apply to nature spirits. So, those would be my thoughts on the matter. I hope you find them helpful, and until next time, may you blessed be. Please join me for our Corellian Peace Prayer. I pray for peace. I pray for love. I pray for stability. I pray for the nation where I live. I pray for the world.